Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Again, I really appreciate it. So why don't you just introduce yourself and tell folks a little bit about you, and then we'll get rolling on your presentation.
Sure. So I'm Josh Hinkle, and I'm the person who leads the investigative team at KXAN-TV. We're the NBC station owned by Nexstar in Austin, Texas. I've been here in Austin at KXAN for almost 12 years, and I started out as a reporter long ago and kind of developed into the manager. Many hats I wear at the station right now because I still do some reporting and some on-air work, but the position as the industry has changed has also changed. So that was pretty cool. I started out, I'm from Oklahoma originally, went to Oklahoma State for my undergrad, studied journalism there, and then decided at that point I needed to get some more hands-on training before I was going to be a reporter. And so I went to the University of Missouri because they have a very hands-on program, and got my master's there in journalism and public policy, really kind of developed an interest in political journalism while I was there working at the Capitol Bureau. So I knew my first job, official first job reporting, I wanted to have some kind of political aspect. So I took a role at KCRG in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, because Iowa was the first in the nation to vote for the presidential caucuses. And so that was really cool to be able to experience the whole presidential campaign for the 2008 election cycle. That was a while back. That was, Barack Obama's first time to run, and that was very, very exciting. And so when it was time to move on from that market, I wanted more political journalism. So I came to Texas because it is a huge state with huge politics, and Austin is a very interesting place because it's a very liberal community inside a very conservative state. So plenty to talk about here. That kind of morphed into me doing political investigations. And around that time, we built out our investigative team to the point where now we have 10 people on it, and it's too big for our news director to handle on his own as a manager. So I had been, I'm very organized, I'm good at multitasking, I'm good at time management. So they said, do you want to run this thing? So I've been doing that for about 8 years now. And like I said, I still do some on-air investigations. I host a weekly political show that airs in all of Nexstar's 14 Texas markets. That's how big the state is each week. And it's really cool because I can kind of blend that political program with the investigative content that that I and my team are producing each week, and they kind of mesh really well. And we've also kind of started going into a lot more digital and multi-platform aspects with our investigations. So the last 3 or 4 years, that's been a big part of my focus, hence the title in my title of innovation. So that's been a lot of fun, and I'll show you some of that stuff a little bit later. But feel free to ask questions at any point or interrupt me or anything, because I'll just keep talking.
Sounds great. So I'd like to ask you, when to start off, just a little bit more of that. When did the light bulb go on in your head when you realized there was this thing that was reporting and there was this thing that was investigative reporting? And how did that understanding crystallize in terms of maybe the difference in opportunity between the two?
Yeah, so when I came to KXAN originally, back in 2009, I was an MMJ, one-man band, and I was the political reporter. And so I was doing daily turns on everything that was happening at the state capitol. And that was a lot of fun, but I started seeing, some things that needed a little bit more digging, a little bit more time sometimes to put on it. And it was, watching other investigative journalists before I was actually doing investigations, I would see that there's a difference in the way that they're questioning the people they're holding accountable, and really owning those results and showing that this story got an impact for the community. And so that's really kind of what clicked in my head. And then, at that point, we didn't really have an investigative presence at KXAN. So I signed up to go to IRE, the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference that they have every year. And, really got to know a lot of people there, learned a lot of skills there, and it just kind of took on from that point. And I mean, it's taken several years to get to the point where I'm at now, and I still have a lot to learn.
It's wonderful. So, we're all about takeaways here too. So if you can think back to yourself as that master's student at University of Missouri or in your undergraduate time, and maybe in your first year or two in the business, if you had the crystal ball that said this was going to be the type of work you would be doing in a couple of years, what would be the top 3 things that you would tell your younger self? You better, bulk up and level up on these 3 things to prepare for that opportunity. What do you think folks maybe listening on the call who aspire to your kind of work might concentrate on now to get themselves ready for this type of opportunity?
I think as an investigative journalist, you have to be so buttoned up with every single thing you're putting out there, because there is a much greater chance that someone's going to be angry and say that you're, lying or something like that. So you have to be able to show proof. Absolutely. And, we've had people threaten lawsuits and stuff. And if you have those things to back it up. So for me, understanding back then how much I was going to need to save notes, take very detailed notes, be able to, if I go through my story after it's written, I need to go through line by line and be able to say I have documentation or records or absolute proof of that, because it's a big deal. I think the other thing, and of course you guys probably are a lot better at this than I was when I was your age, because back then, Facebook was barely a thing. But I think just understanding the digital aspect and how important it is for not just investigations, but for any type of journalism at this point. I mean, I'm sure it's this way at every station, but the majority of people that are consuming your content are going to be doing it on your digital platforms. Most people are not that watch your stories are probably not going to be seeing them in the newscasts. Of course, you want them to see them in the newscasts because that's how your station makes money and all that stuff. And there are some loyal TV viewers out there, but that digital footprint will live a lot longer. And it's also become the most exciting thing for me too, because I'm able to explore stories in ways that I never even dreamed of, back when I was 22.
Interesting. So interns, you guys have heard from Josh about how he made the journey to his current position. Does anybody have a question right now for him about that spark? Grace, you raised your hand first. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Josh, thank you so much for being here, first off.
Sure.
So it's funny you say Mizzou, because that's exactly where I want to go. And I'm looking kind of at grad school right now. So my question for you, and this is journalism based too, not just, hey, how was Missouri? Did you like it? This is more along the line of so how did Mizzou prep you experience wise for your career versus undergrad? Because our program where I am right now is I feel like I'm lacking a little bit of confidence, and that's why I'm looking at grad school. How did they prepare you to really start off and kick it into your career?
Well, so in undergrad, there wasn't at Oklahoma State, there wasn't really a program that focused on that on-air aspect. It was a lot about writing, a lot about newspaper type journalism. And then there was some stuff about producing, obviously, but it was a lot about the behind the scenes stuff. And I would consider myself an extrovert, but I'm still a little shy. So I kind of feel for you also, that confidence, so I wanted to go to a place where I could kind of start from the ground up as far as that, outward aspect of how I'm presenting myself as a journalist. So there are a lot of schools out there, including Mizzou, that do very hands-on programs. And so I just knew that whatever I get, I just need to be thrown into the pool and learn how to swim. And so that was the best thing for me, because Mizzou owns the NBC affiliate in mid-Missouri. And so as scary as it was, it's you are an actual reporter that's working for the community that's seeing you. It's not just a student piece that your professor's going to see.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I was just super curious about that. I have this weird pull to it, and I can't get it out of my head. So it's really cool that I was thinking about it today. So this is really cool that you're here. So thank you so much for that little confirmation. That's really cool.
Yeah. If I can answer any questions about Mizzou or grad school, offline, feel free to reach out to me, because I teach students also at St. Edward's University here in Austin, and I have those conversations quite often.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll get in contact with you for sure.
Ryan, I think you raised your hand too.
Yeah, I was more curious about the actual investigative reporting aspect of your career, Josh. So thank you again. I was just wanted to know, I feel like that is always a subject that you can't really study necessarily at school. And I was curious how your career path moved so that you actually became an investigative journalist as opposed to just a regular reporter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, any type of journalism has some investigative aspects to it. So it wasn't like, you know, one day I just kind of flipped the switch and decided I'm not doing general assignment or just political journalism anymore. I'm going to do only investigations. So I kind of had to think about, you know, what in my daily stories that I'm doing could have an investigative slant to it or an investigative angle. And so it may not be like the entire story is just this, you know, grand investigation, but it might be the one investigative part of a question I could ask, you know, and really highlight that. And I really think that finding a mentor or someone who has been doing investigative work for a long time, whether that's at your station or at another place, like, you know, finding mentors in IRE or at other stations that you really admire, getting their feedback on your work is very critical. I mean, when I was starting out, especially, I was sending, you know, my work to different people that I was meeting at IRE and asking, what would you do better here? How could I phrase this question differently? You know, how would you handle this accountability journalism thing a little bit better? That kind of thing. So, you know, I think that, sorry, one second. I think that, you know, getting that feedback was probably the most crucial thing for me, but I would suggest that for any type of journalism really, but especially for investigative, because I mean, I feel like the truly great investigative journalists have been in journalism for a long time, because it's not something you just, you know, get out of school and become an investigative journalist all of a sudden. It's kind of like the thing you work up to. But I mean, that's not to say like you can't do it right away. But some of the people that I was, you know, getting feedback from had been in the industry for 20 or 30 years and really knew their stuff.
Josh, you raised an interesting point there that I'd like to pull on the thread, if you don't mind, that some people think of investigative journalism as that thing that you make, you know, that type of story that you make. And you hit on something there when you said you can practice investigative journalism on perhaps a portion of a story and apply the skill and the technique to that. Can you recall something earlier in your career where you had already begun this this leveling up process and you said, okay, this story requires that I apply this particular discipline of investigative journalism to it?
Yeah, one of the very first investigative pieces I did was from the Texas House of Representatives, because, you know, sitting on the chamber floor while all the lawmakers are doing their voting and everything, you know, it gets a little boring after a while. So you're watching to kind of see what goes on. And I was seeing that when they were taking their votes, sometimes different lawmakers were voting for each other. Like if someone wasn't in the room, I was like, that's odd. I wonder if they told them to do that or not. So it was, you know, not the story I was doing that day. I was covering like whatever bill they were doing testimony on and voting and everything. But I might mention something about that at the end of my story, you know, not really calling people out or anything, but it gave me enough sense to think about, okay, how does the voting system really work here? Are they allowed to do that? Surely there's a better system, that kind of thing. And so it, you know, I think it took me like 2 weeks kind of just working in the background while I was working on my daily stuff, you know, every day, just kind of chipping away at it a little by little. But then I had a special report that was a pretty good investigation about ghost voting and how it's actually not allowed, but everyone does it. And and it led to some other series of stuff that they had actually implemented these thumbprint scanners under the previous speaker's administration, but then he was not reelected, so that like all, you know, these hundreds of thousands of dollars of these thumbprint machines that were at each entrance to the House of Representatives, they were never utilized and they were just in storage, and people were doing this illegal voting. So it turned out to be pretty good.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you provided some links here. Do you, how would you like to move forward with one of those links, or you take it away? How you'd like to proceed?
Yeah. So, I talked about my investigative team having 10 people. So in non-coronavirus times, when we're not working from home all the time, we meet each week, the entire team, and we talk about what tips we have received, because we receive hundreds of tips even before coronavirus each week, and we can't tackle them all. So we have to figure out which ones kind of fit the mission of our team, who's going to tackle them. So during COVID, we have been meeting weekly on Zoom and do the same thing. And so we put together a video because we were getting so many people, just complaining, but not really giving us valuable tips during COVID, because everyone's angry and they're just like, I can't get tested. I can't get vaccinated. My water's off, okay, but give us some information that is useful so we can help you. And so we created a video and shared it out on social, and it worked really well. I mean, COVID has been totally different for our team compared to what we normally operate in. I think I counted it up the other day. In a normal year, we turn about 250 investigative stories a year, which is a lot, but we have a lot of people on our team. During March to December alone, which was kind of when coronavirus started in Texas, we turned 750 coronavirus related investigations alone, and that's just COVID related investigations. And nursing homes was one of our biggest tips. So some of these we were getting so many tips on that we. Excuse me.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That we created these landing pages for, keeping up with case counts. So we update this every other day, those numbers. We, questions we were getting about, how do I find this? How do I find this? We created this link thing for them, and, just a place to showcase all of our coverage to make it easier for viewers. If you want to go to the Vimeo one about how a tip becomes a story, I'd like to show that one.
Yeah, let me make sure that I've clicked the audio correctly. Sure. So I can, share sound. And you can see it, right?
Yes.
Vimeo. All right. So let me start the recording.
Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and start tackling the tips that have come in. Every morning at 10 o'clock, our entire team meets and we talk about what tips have come in and which ones we need to tackle immediately and who is the best one to do that.
Right now, I'm just working in my house, going through our tip list.
I'm about to go back through some of our hundreds of tips to make sure I've touched base with every family.
The first step is to call or email back the person who sent in the tip so we can get as much information as possible.
We realize that many of you are whistleblowers or maybe are frightened to talk about some of these things.
I try to get in touch with as many people as possible to get a good idea of what may be going on and how we can get answers.
So we are out shooting video for one of our nursing home and assisted living investigations. I am what's called an MMJ, so I shoot and edit all of my own investigations. We're capturing for you, the viewer, what you might not be able to see.
Once we have our interviews, we take everything we've learned and write the story. We then hand the story over to our editor who puts it together.
So then I go down to here, put another endpoint,
so that it's ready for you to watch. Then the story airs.
KXAN investigators have vetted dozens of tips about concerning cases.
And sometimes viewers discover that they have a similar problem or the exact same problem and call us and give us another tip.
Our number one goal is to get answers when you can't.
Tell us your story. Share your concerns. Tell us what your problems are because we want to help you.
The more tips we get, the better equipped we are to fix the problem.
We're going to continue doing this as long as your tips keep coming in.
Great video.
Thanks. And so we put that out on social, and then we created a specialized tip form where we kind of tell people like, this is valuable information, you know, like if you're going to write us, give us this type of detail and all that stuff. And after that, our tips have become, for coronavirus, has become really a lot easier for us to help people, I think, you know.
Is that tip form on the website?
Yeah, if you scroll down on this page a little bit, you'll see it. Keep going down a little bit more. There you go.
Oh, there you go.
That's
yeah,
it.
Great.
Yep.
Awesome.
And then if you scroll down just a little bit more as well, we actually embedded that same video in there. So
perfect. Amazing.
But we put this tip form on every one of our coronavirus related stories too. So it's not just on these landing pages. That way people, if they're exploring our site and, you know, looking for information about the coronavirus or whatever, they'll find it.
Wonderful. Yara, I think you're asking a question. Go ahead.
Yes, when it comes to the stories that you guys actually go ahead and pursue, does impact play a huge role in that decision making? Because sometimes you see these stories that are more over sensationalized, or now in the digital world, it's more like clickbait. So how do you guys differentiate or prioritize certain stories over the ones that you get on a constant basis?
Well, I think that a couple of things. So every investigative team is going to do things a little bit differently. So what we have done over the years is kind of refine like what our mission is and what equals a good story for us. So we first, I think the most important thing is, does this story have broad viewer value? And that's for really any type of story we're doing at KXAN. But, you know, there are those investigators out there or reporters out there that just do stories because they're indulgent, they're interested in that topic, and it may not even be whatever. They just want to like go after someone. And then we have to think like, does this have broad viewer value? Does it affect more than one person? You know, are we going to be helping like a system failure instead of just fighting one person's fight? Because I mean, we do have to prioritize with, you know, hundreds of tips coming in. We can't do all of them. I think the next thing is, does it have a clear and identifiable problem that we can actually investigate and find proof on? And you have to think about, how are you going to be putting this investigation out there? Is this going to be a TV investigation? Because if it is, then I want some great visuals. Is this going to be, you know, a podcast investigation? If so, then we need some awesome audio. The other things that we do consider, especially with our special reports that we're going to be investing a lot of time and money and energy into, is the aspect of, does it have chance to like bring about change? You know, could we have an impact? And is there someone to hold accountable in it? Because we want to show that we're working for people, obviously. So those results are kind of our bread and butter.
Great question. Thank you, Yara. You want to, where to next, Josh?
Yeah, so you're on this page. If you want to reload this page
sure,
real quick. So this is one of our multi-platform investigations that we put together last year. I guess it was last May, and have continued to follow up on it because it involves the legislative session that's going on right now. The premise of it is that there are hundreds of people waiting in jail for a bed in a state hospital to get the mental health treatment they need so they can be competent enough to stand trial. So at this point, there is a huge backlog because the system is just not working for people in Texas jails, that, you know, they are so mentally ill that they are just sitting there and cannot understand why they're in jail, and could not, you know, participate in their trial fully because of that. So, you know, like you see here, back when we were investigating this, the record was like 1,000 people were sitting in jail waiting for mental health restoration. And it was something that we decided to do. We have this digital first unit within our investigative team called Catalyst that takes a multi-platform approach to big topics like this, where we will kind of go all in with everything. So this one had, you see like the 3-part video series, this giant digital site, a podcast season that was related to it. We did some solutions journalism also. So we're not just talking about the problem. And then we, also had like a get help page and stuff, but I would like to show one of these episodes if that's possible.
Sure.
Okay, if you go up a little bit and then click on the one that says the loop, that middle one.
Okay.
They won't say bye.
Here we are, going into Adon's room, and there's Adon. Hi. Adon was just like any other kid growing up.
Hey, Adon, can't come in my room, it's messy.
Loved sports, played football in junior high and also basketball. I like that picture of him when he was playing baseball. That was one of his birthdays. And he was kind of goofy, just silly, made funny faces, as you can see. So my dad called him his chapulín, my grasshopper. He was very energetic all that time. He also had very good grades. In 2004, he graduated from high school and he decided that he wanted to serve his country. He joined the Marine Corps. He was stationed in Iraq. He was a scout sniper. He saw bombs that exploded just right in front of where he was stationed. He was just surrounded by a lot of death and potential for death. And so when he came back, he was not the same young man that left. He did go to the VA. They gave him medication. That was their solution.
How could you tell something was not right?
He slept all day and stayed in his room all the time, except to go to the bathroom to get something to drink. He didn't want to do anything. We all knew something was wrong. We all felt something was terribly wrong.
And tell me about the day that the shooting incident happened here.
Around 2011, May of 2011, he shot 23 bullets into our home from the driveway at about 4 in the morning. It was unexpected.
He thinks he's firing warning shots. Bam, 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 bam.
There were pictures that were taken by the police department of all the places that were impacted. Some of them they went through the door. There's some bullets that went here. Up there were bullets that shot here, that went up over by the fireplace. One of the panes in the kitchen got broken.
I mean, I can't believe you guys weren't hit in this whole...
I can't believe it either.
So the police arrive very quickly, and the cop is drawing his gun and tells him, turn around now, throw it down, throw it down. That was a very scary moment.
He was picked up by the local sheriff's department and taken to jail.
Adon is indicted with 7 different counts over what he did.
He was found incompetent to stand trial. And so I felt a great sense of relief thinking, finally he's going to get some help. And I waited a couple of weeks and nothing happened. He was still there. So I contacted them. And the person who answered the phone said, well, it'll be 8 months to a year. And I was shocked. And I asked, how could that be? And she said, we just don't have enough beds.
If you're dedicated to restoring these people's health, you don't say, we'll get to you in a year. Just stay in the waiting room. And your waiting room is a jail cell.
And then he waited and waited for a trial, and that kept getting canceled and reset and canceled and reset. So he was expected to remain competent in jail without medication, without treatment, and then he was incompetent again.
There's a real need to continue the care they were receiving in the state hospital to make sure that they are getting the mental health services and taking their medication to keep them competent long enough to stand trial.
Right. That's right. Ironically, the more serious the case, like murder or capital murder, the longer the delays, the more likely that you're going to find yourself in this loop. I wonder if that's not cruel and unusual punishment, to have this person loop back over and over endlessly.
What ended up happening with the case?
So up until 2031, and every year there is a review by the judge to see how he's doing. He's been on his medication since May. I call him every day.
Hello?
Hey, Don. How are you doing?
Okay. I'm all right. You know, just working with my doctor. I'm just working with my treatment team. It's okay here. They're working on my discharge. I just got a letter from my lawyer today.
Oh, good.
So hopefully within the next month or two or month and a half or something like that,
okay.
I'm looking at discharge, getting back out there, going to school, and just having a regular life and not being stuck here. You know?
Yeah.
I am going to study for my criminal justice degree and, you know, pursue a career, something like either in mental health counseling.
What can we do now to make things better and to help a young man who's intelligent have that future? Get out there and live his life. What can we do to make that happen?
Turn around. Turn around.
What needs to change in the system to allow that to happen?
Here you go, Adon.
Okay, you can stop that now. So a few things about that one. My thing about an investigation is that sometimes they can be so in the weeds, especially when you're dealing with a very complicated issue like this, that you want to be able to explain it as plainly as possible to people because you've just got a little bit of time to get their attention. So that's why you saw some of the graphics were very simplistic but effective, I thought. And then the most important thing for any story, especially for investigations, I think, is to find those real characters. You know, I could have easily done this story and just talked about the numbers and shown a bunch of video of jails and state hospitals, but being able to look through those numbers and find the families that are impacted by this really helped this topic, you know, resonate with our viewers a lot more than it would have if you wouldn't have had someone they could relate to. I mean, you felt for that mother, you felt for that son, and it sucks that they're in this situation, but hopefully, you know, stories like this will help grab the attention of lawmakers and different people that can help with the situation. Some of the things you saw that we did in there, you know, like I said, this was a digital first investigation. So we tailored it for people mostly on their mobile devices. So like when you saw all the captions and everything, which matched the exact type of font that we're using all throughout the website, we wanted it to be cohesive, but knowing people on, you know, their mobile devices aren't always actually listening to the audio. So at least they'll get to read what's happening. So, you know, just really paying attention to detail on some of those things and learning from each investigation you do what worked on this one, what can I do differently in the next one to make that one even better.
So that open captioning technique of the open captions on with the graphics on all of the interviews and all the audio was a specific strategy because of, you know, knowing people were going to watch it on their phone, right?
Correct. Yes.
Powerful story, powerful section, powerful website. Any questions for anybody about this particular video or story? Good stuff. Thanks for sharing that, Josh.
Sure. You know, something like this, we're working on in the background and doing all the other work we're doing. So this isn't something I will take an entire day and work on. It's like whenever I have a free hour, I'll, you know, set up an interview or I'll, you know, mine through the data or something like that. So, you know, front to back, this took like 10 months to put together. But when it came out, we had a lot of content. So it's not like you're just putting something out on TV one night and it's over. Something like this, you want to make sure that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. So that's why we have the investigation is different for podcast listeners that came out weekly instead of all in one day. There were 4 episodes for that one. You know, the digital first aspect of it was great for those digital users, but we also created TV versions of the stories that were a little shorter, didn't have the captions like that. So our TV viewers weren't, you know, neglected as well. If I have time for one more, I was going to show just the first part of our political program to show how some of the recent winter weather investigations that we have been doing made it into something that we're doing. And this format is a lot different from what you just saw. So this is maybe a little bit more traditional.
Crisis conditions in Texas. A winter storm brings record-breaking cold and problems on a scale never seen before.
We have some water, some drinking water for maybe tomorrow, but I don't know after that.
Millions of Texans left without electricity as temperatures drop to life-threatening levels.
No power, nothing, no electricity, nothing, and it's cold there.
People died trying to stay warm.
It's clear that what is going on right now is completely unacceptable.
As the temperatures rise, so do calls for accountability.
We live in a state with the most abundant energy sources on the planet. There's no reason we should be starving for energy.
The focus now, who's responsible?
There's been an utter lack of preparation and a neglect of the state's power system.
And how do we keep this from happening again?
That reckoning needs to start probably next week in terms of trying to figure out what happened.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this special edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle, and this week we join you from outside the state capitol, where this week lawmakers will return to work with a new task: answers and accountability about what happened during last week's electricity crisis. Lawmakers will put a lot of attention on ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. They're in charge of managing most of the state's power grid. ERCOT planned for a high-energy demand event this winter. They expected thermal and hydro resources like gas, coal, and water power would need to generate 67,000 megawatts of electricity per hour to meet the demand. But the historic winter storm made demand surge beyond predictions, and power supply dropped to dangerous levels. On Monday, frozen instruments and a limited gas supply forced 30,000 megawatts of power generation offline. By some estimates, that's enough electricity to power 9 million homes, suddenly gone. On top of that, Texas Grid also lost power from frozen wind turbines and solar energy. And we know what happened next. Millions of Texans lost electric power. With no heat, pipes froze, water plants shut down. Even though it's warmed up, millions of Texans are still dealing with the crisis. The governor and top emergency officials in the state have been addressing efforts to help Texans now. Wes Rappaport joins us with more. Wes?
Hi, Josh. Over the past couple of days, Governor Abbott has been outlining key components to...
So, in a sense, you know, I can do an entire half hour every Sunday about investigative content because we have so much stuff going on now with our team, you know, looking at these critical issues. A political show is actually very interesting to our viewers.
Good stuff. You mentioned something earlier that I'd like to pull the thread on real quick, if you don't mind. This idea of the Catalyst series on the mental health in jails taking 10 months to do, and you specifically mentioned having to carve out little pieces of time to work on an element of that story, which you know in the end will add up to this big project. And I think many young reporters and producers, when they first enter the business, think in very linear terms. I start my day, I do my research, I gather my material, I write, I edit, it's done, I start over the next day. But the most successful journalists understand that you may have to do that on today's story, but you need to carve out a little bit of time to work on something which will air next week or next month. Can you talk a little bit about where that epiphany happened for you and maybe some of the techniques you utilize to be able to do that in an organized fashion and you and your team employ to keep track of all that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been good at multitasking. I'm just kind of very detailed like that. But for me, it's just figuring out what are my immediate priorities and what are my long-term priorities. And so I make sure that I get my immediate priorities, like if I was a daily reporter, get everything set up for that story first before I carve out any time for something else. But I also don't waste a lot of time. There's never like kicking back and watching TV or anything like that. Even when I'm working from home, I try to really utilize every minute I have. A free five minutes is one phone call, that kind of thing. Lists have become very, very important with what I do also, especially managing, 9 other journalists. So, I check things off and I find that that's a really simple thing, but something that a lot of people forget because when you're dealing with an investigative type story, there's so many details and so many moving parts and so many bells and whistles that it's easy to forget things if you don't, prioritize and make sure that you're checking things off. I think also realizing that with investigative journalism, you are very excited about whatever your topic is, so you want it to happen immediately, but all the players in the story may not be ready, so you put an open records request in Texas, they have, legally 10 days to respond to you. So you just know, like, if I get that request in first thing in the morning, like I'll shoot an email off right before I jump on the morning editorial meeting. And then hopefully 10 days later, I'll have a response and I'll have the records I need. So then I can kind of put that in my calendar, knowing like this is going to come back then. So yeah, it's just a lot of multitasking, and it didn't, happen overnight. It's just something you get better at over time.
Great. Any questions for Josh coming out of that last story or about anything he said? I would maybe turn it a little bit toward specifically the development of sources and the idea that, going to a source on Tuesday and maybe expecting something out of them on Tuesday is not often the case, especially with work like you do. You get to know that person and you develop a source for a payoff maybe 30 days or a year down the road. Can you talk a little bit about how you develop sources, win their trust, and then work them to keep a pipeline of stories flowing from a trusted source?
Yeah. I think one of the most important things that I learned is that sometimes your best sources are not the people who are, your public officials or your lawmakers or the people in charge of whatever. It's their staff or it's their interns, people that may not make it on TV into your story, but the people that can kind of give you that gossip and let you kind of have a spark to look further at something. And when you are dealing with those type of people, sometimes they're a little fearful that they're going to get in trouble and lose their job or whatever. So you have to realize, like, this person's putting themselves on the line to give me some information. So you want to make sure you don't burn them and keep that relationship as safe as possible. I see a lot of people a lot of journalists sometimes walking a very fine line between friendship and sources. And I think that's very dangerous because you can go to coffee with your source and like get, information and everything, but then it's a different, a different ballgame, I guess, if you kind of become friendlier with them. And then I think you have to think of, like, what would the viewers think if they knew that I was friends with this person? Would it look slanted, or would it look biased? That kind of thing. So you just have to make sure that you don't cross that line. Those are some of probably the best things that I've learned over the years.
Wonderful. What do you hope to be? You've obviously learned a tremendous amount of stuff during your career and mastered a lot of new skills to keep elevating your game. I'm curious, what's on your horizon or your short list of what would you like to learn next?
Well, first off, I would like to get done with the pandemic because it is, even though we have gotten really creative and good at storytelling during it, it is very challenging and tiring.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to get past that for a lot of reasons. We had, some new staff members that joined my team right at the start of the pandemic. And part of my job as a manager is to, help cultivate their skills and get them to where they want to be as well. So I'm really excited to be able to, work hands-on in person with those people a little bit more. A lot of what I do, whether it's as, an adjunct professor at St. Edward's or working with our interns on our team or, working with the journalists that are on my team, is teaching and training and critiquing and giving feedback. And I enjoy doing that kind of stuff in a constructive way. So I want to continue doing that. I want to continue also just getting better at what I'm doing. I mean, I'm by no means the master of investigations or anything. I've gotten good at it, but every time I go to an IRE conference or talk to a peer in the industry or something, I'm learning something new. And I want to learn, one of the reasons I've stayed at KXAN for 12 years, because I've had chances to leave, is that I've always felt challenged in a good way. I'm always getting to kind of up my game and try new things, and I'm never bored. And so when you find a place like that, I think that, that's a really good indication that you're probably at the right spot, that you feel like you're always getting to feel fulfilled at the end of the day. And that's what's most important.
Wonderful. Samantha, I believe you have a question.
Yes. Hi, Josh.
Hi.
So glad that you're here with us today. Thank you for coming. I have family in Texas, and they've also been going through it these past couple of days. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you finally have water back and that you're here. So thank you for doing that. I wanted to say, I actually saw your shirt in an ad the other day. I really like it. And my question kind of is tailored to that. When people, I guess, when you approach them for an interview or something, I recently had to do one. It wasn't for this internship, it was for IRE TV, which is my school's student-run television station. And it was a story about like protests. There's these peaceful protests here in Auburn, kind of just to end racism, and they spark conversations with people that probably have different views. And when I went to interview them, I was going by another, I guess it was counter protest this one day, and they kind of were not very nice about what I was doing there. And they were like, oh, of course, the media only wants to highlight one side of the story, all these kind of things. And that's not true. I was, just there doing what I was told, I guess focusing the story on the other protests. I didn't know they would even be there. So if you've had those experiences, what is your go-to response? How do you approach those situations in, I guess, a respectful way?
Yeah, this is the shirt. The media, it's crossed out, journalist instead. The thing that I've realized is that sometimes people just like to be angry, and sometimes they like to argue, and there's no reasoning with them sometimes, and sometimes you're never going to get through to them. But I think early on, when you're seeing those kind of conversations or getting an email, that you can easily discern whether this person is someone that is credible and can also be part of the story, or just move on. I mean, you have to have a tough skin, especially as an investigative journalist. I've been yelled at and cursed out and everything over the years, but it just comes with the territory. But I think that especially right now, that the media is highly scrutinized, just doing a really good job at being unbiased and neutral and presenting both sides of whatever issue it is, and telling that person who's arguing with you, watch my report, or send them a link to it later, because hopefully maybe you didn't get through to them in that first 5 minutes, but the next day they will see, okay, Josh did treat that subject fairly, so I can trust him. And the media is not all bad, so maybe they'll become a source for you later on down the road. That's happened, where people will about face, or it's just everyone's different, but that's my approach.
Thank you.
Josh, these are different times. I mean, you've been in this business for a while. I've been in the business a little bit longer than you, and I have seen things change, and I've seen the number of people that have a default respect for journalists and what they do shrink, or at least become less vocal in terms of support. And so how do you deal with that, and how do you help your staff deal with it? And then more so, and along with that, what advice would you give to these young journalists on the eve of getting into the business so they understand what they're getting into? It's fun and it's fulfilling, but there are challenges, and you have to be mindful of taking care of yourself.
Yeah. I think for me, it's really celebrating the wins. You're going to have a lot of bad days, you're going to have a lot of days where you feel like beaten up and tired and everything. But it's really celebrating my wins and also my team's wins. So anytime like they hit a home run, I'm there as their supervisor, saying like, oh, that was awesome. Like, I loved your stand up, or I thought the way you phrased that question was really good. And it's, doing that on a consistent basis, and not just like, at the end of the year or something. I mean, it's been really challenging, especially to do that while we're working from home also. So like I have, monthly virtual happy hours with my team, and we all just get on at like 6 o'clock and have a drink, and don't even talk about work. We just kind of catch up with each other because we miss the camaraderie that we had, that kind of thing. So I think it's also really important to not let work become the only thing in your life. A lot of journalists do that, and I think it's really unhealthy. And I suffer from that sometimes too. I'm a workaholic, but you have to unplug and step away sometimes, because your mental health can be at risk if you don't. So I think just, also remember who you're doing this for, that while it's fun for you and fulfilling for you, ultimately your role as an investigative journalist is to help other people. So if you can, share that with them and see that coming from them, then I think that you also, maybe that's a great way to balance the negativity that's happening against the media right now.
Wise words. Thank you for sharing those. Did anybody else have a question that had raised their hand or anything? Okay. I'm going to, Jared, with your permission, I'm going to use your question you put to another speaker a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to ask Josh the same question. As you look back, Josh, on that moment, perhaps when you were coming out of Mizzou, and what are the one or two things that now that you wish you could go back in time and tell that younger Josh Hinkle as he was entering the business?
I think for me, just because I'm kind of like a perfectionist, I wanted to be like everything on day one, but you got to realize, like, whenever you're starting somewhere or whatever you're doing, start slow, become a master of like the little things and work up to it. You can't maybe be 100% on day one, but you can get there. So take a deep breath, and because it can be really stressful, especially when you're starting a new job. And that's probably the biggest thing for me. The second thing is, having done this for almost 20 years, you probably aren't going to be where you think you were going to be 20 years ago. I mean, I never thought that I'd be a manager, that I'd be doing investigations when I first got out of college, but I really like it now. So you kind of just have to go with the flow a little bit and realize that everything's changing. And just because you didn't become something that you thought back then doesn't mean you're a failure or whatever. The other big thing for me, and I always tell this to my students, because this is something that always kind of gets in the back of my head, because I'm a very competitive person, which many journalists are. And so, unhealthily, I think I compare myself to other journalists quite often. And that's not good, because each journalist is different. Each one of you tells stories differently, talks differently, looks different, and so you bring something different to the table, that you are so unique that you're going to be something special to the viewers, no matter what you do in some way. So I think don't worry about what other people are doing. Watch them for ideas, get their feedback on your work, but don't think like, just because that person, won this award and I didn't win that award, I'm not good, because that kind of thing can build up over 20 years. You you kind of have to get, like I said, a thick skin, and that's one of the biggest things for me. So hopefully that helps you.
Wise words. I'd like to, we were coming up on the hour mark here. I want to be respectful of your time, but you've mentioned a couple of things during the course of our discussion here that I want to revisit, but then also have you add to. You mentioned IRE, which I think is an incredible organization. And if someone aspires to do this kind of work, they really need to join IRE, in my opinion. Besides that, talk a little bit about that if you'd like, and then talk a little bit about other ways people can get a start on learning the techniques of this craft and the skills that are required to do this kind of work.
Yeah, IRE is great. It is not just like you're in the organization and there's like a yearly conference. They have different trainings, virtual and in person, all throughout the year. And many of the trainings will offer scholarships to working journalists or to students. So you don't have to pay your way, or you don't have to pay as much of it. And it's just really good. And they have a mentorship program also, so you can be paired up with someone to get that kind of feedback. That's really good. They also have another organization within IRE called NICAR, the National Institute of Computer Assisted Reporting. And basically that's all the, I would say the majority of people that are taking part in like the NICAR conference, which is next week, are print and digital journalists, not broadcast journalists. But there is a growing number of broadcasters like myself that are doing data work and digital work. And it's really exciting to see that kind of thing. So, if you're interested in investigative methods that involve computer assisted reporting, definitely NICAR is one to look at. For me, lately, the last couple of years, an interesting aspect of investigations has been what I kind of mentioned earlier with that locked in limbo piece, solutions. So the Solutions Journalism Network, which is a nonprofit that works with newsrooms to help them go beyond the problem and also look at the solution. We've been taking investigative approaches with the Solutions Journalism Network for projects we've done at KXAN and with Nexstar. And I think that they're a really good resource as well. So definitely something, if you're tired of only reporting like negative news and not kind of looking beyond what's wrong with our society right now, but you also want to investigate the solution and if it's working somewhere else and could it work here, that's a good organization, the Solutions Journalism Network.
Excellent resources.
Mm-hmm.
Josh, incredible presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your story about how you got to where you are, the kind of work you're doing, sharing those incredibly powerful examples of the meaningful and change-making work that you're doing there in Austin for the Catalyst unit and the investigative unit, and of course your political show too. Any closing thoughts for these students as many of them are contemplating graduating in May and entering the industry, and about today, about that journey, or just in general, how would you like to wrap up your comments today?
I am just very appreciative of you guys and all your questions and for paying attention to my presentation. I think that it's exciting to see that you are this invested in it. I think this is really cool that you do this kind of meeting to get real world advice and experience and everything. So if there's anything I can, do, if you think of questions later, or if you ever need any advice on anything, feel free to reach out to me. That bio that he showed at the first of the presentation has my email and other social media on there and everything. So reach out anytime. I'm happy to help.
Thanks so much. And I will share here now the PowerPoint again, because the links to all of those stories that we watched are in that PowerPoint, and also previously emailed in the invitation to today's meeting or all of Josh's contact information. And here it is again. And I will forward this PowerPoint to everybody on the call when our meeting is concluded, so that you can reach out to Josh and learn more about him and his team and the work they're doing. And Josh, I always also offer up a recommended reading that's sort of in theme with what we're doing in the call today. And today's recommended reading is not a specific textbook about how to do investigative journalism, but I read this book recently, and it's about Area 51, and it's by Annie Jacobson, nominated for the Pulitzer Prize in history, and she's primarily a military reporter. And this book is incredible, and it's incredible for a number of reasons. The subject matter is interesting, and she's not an evangelist for kind of wacky UFO theories or anything, not at all. She's a straight military reporter, but this investigation took years to bring this book to fruition, and she unbundles not only what information she gathered, but how she was able to gather that information, the sources that it came from, the people, the documents, and the mechanics of putting a full book-length investigation together. And so this would be my offered recommended reading to the group in terms of getting a peek behind the scenes at a major investigation that took years to come to fruition. And Annie, of course, has a track record of incredible work. And it's just an interesting book too. I like military history, and it's incredibly well done journalism. And so that's the recommended reading today for our subject. But Josh, you're welcome to stick around. We got a few housekeeping issues about assignments for this week, but if you need to go, we of course want to be respectful of that. But again, awesome presentation, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I will duck out. I got another meeting, but it was nice to meet all of you. Have a good day.
Be blessed.